So what's life been like, Whitney, since this whole, I mean, we haven't talked in what, like a year and a half now. I mean, last time we are talking about rice, different ways of, developing it, the innovations that are going on in the industry. Has industry obviously been affected since the pandemic, right? Like, how is it going with all that now?
I mean, the rice industry hasn't maybe been affected quite as much as other industries. We don't have a lot of labor comparatively. So, in regards to like, using or having people available for labor in the fields, it hasn't been quite as bad. Um, but for like me personally, it's been more difficult because we use a lot of labor and research, and it's been a little bit harder to navigate around some of the restrictions and just people, availability since people have kids and things like this. So it's been a difficult year.
Has there been any like strong innovations or changes? Like, let's say your research, for instance, what exactly are you on with the research recently?
So recently, I mean, I'm primarily a weed scientist, so a lot of my research is related to weeds still and rice. That's primarily what I do.
Okay,
So
so
nothing like, I mean, there's lots of stuff, but it's uh I don't know. I don't know how interesting it is to everyone.
it's got to be
Lots of
interesting. I
stuff.
mean, people want to know where their food comes from at the same time. Like, I just started eating rice. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, maybe a month ago, I never, like, just maybe Chinese food when I did takeout or something, but I just started making my own rice. First of all, when you're making a 90-second bag in the microwave, you want to make sure you have it open first. I learned that the hard way.
Did it
Exploded in
explode?
my microwave. Yeah, scared the crap out of me. But, man, it's a sustainable food. It's really good. I understand why people can actually really love it. Spicing it up especially, but also like it's something where it might seem like a lot of people talk about, oh, it's just blank calories or it's just this. And I'm like, yeah, but it also is a good way of staying alive. And, it's a very sustainable food. I mean, trying to find, I think the particular problem will be growing that in places where you can't grow rice, trying to find like plant hybrids, for instance, finding a way to edit the gene code or something that to be able to grow in a harsh environment. I mean, especially nowadays with technology, we're more focused on growing things on Mars rather than we're focused on growing things in countries that can't grow those things.
True. And I mean, I think like from the standpoint of changing climate, water availability, all those sorts of things. I mean, rice is just as affected as all of our other crops. So it'll be, in California where it looks like we're headed into a drought again. So we're expecting some issues with water this year. But it's not really a new thing. It's been increasing, I guess, in frequency over the past 10 to 15 years, where we have a lot of years now that we have not as much water as we should have.
What would you say you think like maybe like the next couple of months or maybe like looking forward maybe 10 years, for instance? What do you think like advances or things that we could be working on to make it more sustainable or easier on you, I would say, for your job as well? Because like I'm a big proprietor of farmers, for instance. Like I think everyone should know where their food comes from. Like before you eat a plate of chicken, I think you should see what it happens to a chicken that gets you that plate of chicken. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
Mostly because the waste. There's so much waste that's going on. A lot of people aren't paying attention, not only environmentally when it comes to us using cars and all these types of things, but more like a food production issue. We're making a lot of food, but it's not all being used. We're kind of throwing most of that away, and it's very, very wasteful considering the amount of production it takes, the amount of work it takes to be able to produce something like that.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a good point. I'm teaching this semester, and I was actually just talking to my students about this like about 2 weeks ago, um, about food waste and like where most food waste happens in Western countries in the US and stuff. And it's mostly in people's homes or at the store or restaurant level. So, farmers have been, or, been becoming more and more efficient, but people in their own houses and restaurants and things for a variety of reasons, we waste a lot of food. So you're not wrong. And like actually with my students, we were talking about it in the context of, where does it go once it leaves your house? It goes into landfills, and landfills produce certain gases, including methane, and that's a potent greenhouse gas. So we were kind of talking through the whole, process of, yeah, where does food go? Where does food waste go? Where are we wasting it? And like thinking about that sort of as a an entire cycle, and how can each one of us try to reduce the amount of food we're wasting in our own homes.
Yeah.
A lot of people waste a lot of food because You know, I think food is relatively cheap in the United States compared to other places, and so we don't always think about it as, you know, I think an expense. Actually, to be honest with you, a lot of people don't think of it as like a significant part of their budget, and therefore it's easy to waste food,
Well,
especially fruits and vegetables.
yeah, we've created struggle, I would say. Like back in the day, people used to try and their hardest to get food. Now we're doing fasting diets where we're literally creating struggle. We're forcing starvation just to lose a couple of lbs. And I'm like, this is what shows you that we might be too comfortable as a society. I feel like a lot of our focus goes into, you know, oh, who's going to be the next celebrity that we see on the tabloids, or who's the next movie that's coming out? I'm like, shit, man. Like we have things that we could be fixing. Like I had talked to a friend of mine, John Goodwin, who's a beekeeper, and he was
Oh,
trying to
okay.
find a way to make his bees be able to help grow crops, for instance, be able to, like, you know, not really control them but breed them enough to where they could have a set mentality of spreading, you know, pollination, kind of an ideal thing. Because I'm like, there's got to be a workaround here. Like we're all on this planet together, and that's not out of coincidence. That's got to be like, there's got to be workarounds that we could find better ways to work with each other rather than be one person be a superior and one person not. You know what I mean? And it's like,
For sure.
if you look at environmental issues, for instance, I know people are working in the realms of mycology, people are working in the realms of botany, all these types of things. Everyone has a fucking house plant. I'm like,
Yeah.
can we focus on like actually taking care of the outside? Like I think everyone during this pandemic had a little bit of time to get into a couple of hobbies, and some of that might involve sourdough bread, but at the same time, people decided to make a little garden outside and figure out what it's like to grow something, and the feeling that you get when you actually have a plant that you can pick your own tomato off of. And I'm not even with tomato, grow rice. First of all, rice, if I'm not mistaken, is not too hard to grow. It's actually a pretty tough plant.
Well, it is. I mean, I'd say like it is kind of hard to grow. It doesn't grow well everywhere, so it doesn't do super well in like colder environments. But it, you know, and it doesn't actually need like a ton of water. It doesn't need to be flooded to grow. So you're right in that it does. It's not that hard to grow, maybe in the grand scheme of things. But like one rice plant isn't going to produce enough rice for somebody to really eat a lot.
Yeah.
You really need a pretty large area, and so maybe in that regard, it's a little bit harder than like say a tomato or something.
What would you say, like, if you had to pick, like, what's a goal that you're trying to accomplish maybe in the next year? Because I mean, it's been a year since we talked. What have you done in that year?
So a lot of my work again focuses on you know, weed management and rice here in California. But I mean, and I'm constantly doing other things. A lot of my job is outreach with growers, talking to people individually. So I mean,
That's one of the most important things, though, because I feel like a lot of the big issues is people are making legislature or making agricultural laws or certain guidelines they have to go by, but they're not even involved in the industry. I'm like, you got to talk to a man on the ground, you got to, or a
mhm,
woman on the ground. You got to talk to someone who's involved and who's like, that's an important thing. Much like for me, for instance, I'm talking to a bunch of different people every single day. You're talking to people that are involved in the industry that are hands down dealing with everything that happens to do with growing these crops, and they have the best insight into it rather than some person that's sitting in an office cubicle, you know, typing up, oh, I can Google what rice is. Sure. But have you talked to someone about like what do they go through on a daily basis, the amount of work and the
very
amount of
true.
effort that goes through that? I mean, first of all, it's backbreaking work. I wouldn't do it. Mostly because I didn't even know you had to open up the bag first before you threw it in the microwave. Uh, but it's an aspect of like people, especially with the consumption in the world, it's not just the consumption of like television or entertainment. That's our priority, as most of the population's priority is what's going to be on television, WandaVision, whatever. But what about where your food comes from? We're so looking at our diets so exclusively now, you know, trying to find, oh, the Atkins diet or whatever this or a new diet trend or fasting, whatever. But what about your food? The FDA regulates this stuff for us, but like what are you actually putting into your body? Where is it coming from? Don't you want to know the people that are handling your food and taking care of it and putting all the backbreaking effort into it?
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the things I think that's improved this year with the pandemic because a lot of market venues, market avenues kind of broke down. We all saw that happen last spring. You know, people saw, you know, milk being dumped and stuff, and all that was because the normal, you know, those channels of how we ship and process food are very tight and very regulated in the US. So when one thing like breaks down, like the end buyer isn't there anymore, then suddenly, there's no way for us to like switch up those supply chains really fast and pivot. But I think one of the things that the pandemic kind of did for us last year was, and I saw this with some of the growers around here, is they, started doing more direct to consumer um, sales, and we're able to kind of pivot a little bit more. And it's easier to do for something like rice, right? Because it's not going to go bad in 2 days.
Yeah.
Milk is a lot harder to direct to consumer.
Yeah.
So, thousands of gallons of milk. But like at least with some of the crops, it was easier for the growers to switch and sort of diversify their markets. And I think people saw that as well and got excited and were, wanting to reach out and understand more about their food and where it was coming from. So I think there was a lot more reception from the public as well.
Do you think that you would have maybe a possibility of like or an aspiration, I would say, to probably create a YouTube channel to be able to educate people about this type of stuff too? So for people that probably can't visit these places on their own, like for me, I live in a beach town. So trying to find a rice farm around here would probably take me a good long while or a good long walk, I'd say, to go find the nearest place that would have that. Like I can see fish be caught, but even trying to find a meat get slaughtered, I'd have to go a couple states over to where they have like the big chicken plant or something like that. So like if you had a YouTube channel, that would just help out a bunch of people like myself that don't have this availability to be able to understand what this crop is, where it comes from. I mean, I can watch a BBC documentary, but I don't want to see some person, with going, well, the pile of wubble that's sitting on the hill. And I'm like, all right, man, I already can't do it. You lost me when you said wubble. I don't get it. Like I feel like you could do a way better method of at least showing people, hey, this is rice.
Yeah.
This is how it gets cultivated in personal interviews too. I mean,
Well, I'll be honest with you. There's actually some growers that have started to do more things like this. And in rice, we lucked out. There's a rice grower around here, Matt Slager, who actually runs his own YouTube channel, and it's called Rice Farming TV. And I think they're like on a weekly basis, maybe. And yeah, he goes through the entire season. I think he's been doing it for maybe 3 to 4 years now. So it's like a whole bank full of videos now on rice farming, and he's really good. He does a better job than I would.
well, you don't sell yourself short, I'd say. But when it comes to creating content, not only in that way too, but I mean, we are advancing with technology and everything like that too. I just feel like now this education platform also has to catch up with it. If we can't reach people, like have them come down and take tours and understand the rice themselves, it makes a better impact, I'd say, if we can hit them through social media and teach them the benefits, teach them these types of things, and also know the processing of how it all gets, manufactured. I mean, a lot of people look at it like, oh, they see the rice in a box on a shelf made by Uncle Ben or something like that. But it's like, who's the guy that's doing that? Who's the person that's putting in the back-breaking work, talking to that person, getting their story or something like that, because that leads up into a better understanding of like I think the whole thing of rationalism. You need to learn
Mm-hmm.
how to ration your food properly. I think people make way too much, like we say, excess waste and things of that
Yeah.
sort. There's got to be a way to fix that. There's got to be a way to show people that just because you have all this on a plate doesn't mean you need to eat it all right now. It means you can save some for later, put it in a storage thing. Rice is typically pretty easy to store. It's one of those, like, I would say it's like a prepper food. You put it in your bomb shelter because it's typically never going to go bad, like canned beef, or not canned beef,
True.
some cans or foods or whatever. But it it's something that people like. I barely know anything really about rice. Like that's probably most of the population. I might know above average, but most of the population doesn't understand that stuff. And most population doesn't even understand more than what's on the back of their cereal box. Like it's very, very hard to try and explain things to people because there's no wantingness to learn. And I'm like, there's got to be a fun way to teach that to people.
Yeah, and I mean, my personal like view on that is I totally agree with you, and I try to do, outreach where I can. Um, but I mean, there are a lot of growers, like I mentioned, doing it now. That there's YouTube channels, there's Instagrams. I don't know all of them, but I follow a lot of them. There's the Peterson Farm Brothers. They do like like songs basically like about farming, where they take like popular songs, and I think they've been doing their parody videos for maybe like 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer than that. So there's a lot of growers now farmers doing outreach that way. So exactly what you're saying. And I think that's a definite positive thing. Scientists like myself, we're trying to get better at it, but I think a lot of us aren't necessarily that skilled with social media. but working on it. I do have my own Instagram, and I know a few other scientists that do. Maybe not as many in the ag sciences, but I do know that there are more scientists trying to,
Is there
really do what
a
we do.
is there a change, I would say, at least with the pandemic, with like, I know a lot of people were talking about how their water was getting clearer. A lot of things were getting better when it came to the environment. Like I know in Hawaii, for instance, after 10 months of nobody really being in the ocean and experiencing the coral, people being inside their house, the coral started to come back. Are you seeing any of that with like some of the water quality down there, or maybe some of like at least some of the landscape kind of coming back or bringing back to a sense of maybe like a calming state, I would say?
I mean, I haven't noticed that necessarily around here. Ag didn't stop, right? So everyone's still been farming and stuff because people are still eating. So I mean, we were one of the essential sectors, and we haven't stopped. Our work hasn't really changed. I mean, maybe in some ways how we've had to work has changed, but we haven't stopped working. So in terms of like farmed landscapes, I haven't seen any changes. Maybe in terms of some of the natural landscapes around here, but I think a lot of the changes that have been happening are related to drought and other things in California.
Yeah. And so even though that's like a heavy place that we produce rice, I would say, are they finding ways to fix like the drought scenarios and stuff besides just spraying crops or trying the best to keep them watered? Like, has they ever thought about maybe using an artificial dome? And I know that like even saying that sounds like, oh, that's futuristic, but at the same time, like I like the natural flow of things. I don't want to have a dome over my head, but if you have a better way to keep your food alive or keep this thing without praying to God, like we have to sacrifice something for the rain gods. You know what I mean? Like, is there a better way to keep it sustained where there's not that fear, that worry of I pray that we're going to get rain one of these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think in ag, most of what we've been doing is trying to become more water efficient. So trying to, farm with less water. So there's tons of work being done on that. I mean, I don't even know because we grow so many crops in California, but a big, I'd say a big area has been like, using drip irrigation. Doesn't really work so well in rice, but drip irrigation would be a big one in like tomatoes and some of our tree crops, so that you're only watering, where you're planted something. Um, but it doesn't work in all cropping systems. It's a little bit hard to use. So, doing that. So basically just trying to become more water efficient, having varieties that are more water efficient, use less water and produce still as much food as before. So there's a lot of research and a lot of work being done. But yeah, on a large scale, I think it's hard to, fix everything. We've also got projects working on like groundwater recharge. We found that like flooding fields actually helps to recharge groundwater. So there's some of that. Planting trees help with retaining moisture. So where you have trees, you have more rain. But California's climate is and landscape is not really heavily wooded, just naturally. So it's I don't think there's one solution, but lots of people are working on lots of different things.
Now, with your research, for instance, like, is there a typical study or something that you're trying to focus on? Are you just focusing on the plant, or are you talking to just the consumers, or not the consumers, but the growers in general?
So I mean, I work on specific projects, but I mean, I cover research in lots of different areas. But again, I'm work primarily in rice and primarily in weeds in rice. So
But
lots of research focuses in that area.
what I'm asking is, what about rice though? Like, because I'm thinking like avenues of
Yeah.
like, are you studying the effects of GMOs on rice? Do they have any effects if there are any effects? I mean, rice is like, it's not like you're like making rice taste like cotton candy like they do with some grapes or something like that. But there's a way of like, you don't have enough water, you start spraying it with a certain chemical and it helps, maybe it helps it keep growing. You know what I mean? Is there a certain research study that you're doing specifically with rice that's different that might shock me or something?
I mean, rice, we don't have any GMO rice. So, most of our breeding techniques are sort of traditional rice breeding or traditional breeding techniques for plants. We don't have GMO rice in California or anywhere. There's golden rice, but that's only in Asia, and I still am not sure if I think it is available for consumption now. But that was specifically to deal with malnutrition, right? It's increased vitamin A content. So it's not, it really had nothing to do with farming practices. It was more to do with people and their nutrition
Yeah.
when they eat a lot of rice. But in terms of GMO rice, we don't have any that we grow in the US. So most of my work is related to management of pests, so weeds or diseases or insects in rice, and then just figuring out how to sort of farm more effectively and more efficiently so that folks aren't, spending a ton of money on something that doesn't work, or increasing yields so that we're getting more rice per acre to feed everyone else. So kind of focusing on those things,
Is the
and
pro
also the environmental aspect of it. We obviously take that into account as well.
Yeah, kind of. I think a
Mhm.
lot of when it comes to, especially if you're a farmer and you're a producer, you care a little bit more about the land than if you were just a person that's like, oh, I'm gonna plant this one plant in my backyard. It's like, okay, well, that's a small step, of course, but if you're getting more involved into it, you have a more sense of a care. For instance, is there
For sure, I agree with that. Yeah, yeah. Actually, growers, I'd say, and farmers in general are probably they probably care about the land a lot more than most people because their living is made off of the land. So they don't want to destroy the land. That's not the point of farming. They want to be able to farm far into the future. So a
what
lot
are
of
what are some environmental impacts you would say that could easily be fixed? Because I'm always looking at like ways to like I could pick up trash for sure on the side of the street, which I've done before. But I'm like, what's a better way to like easier way for people, especially like certain things that you've noticed through your work being on the ground and everything that could be fixed, to help with some environmental issues.
Well, I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about food waste, and I think that on an individual level, making sure that we're not wasting food in our own houses. Americans throw away a lot of food, and not wasting food, making sure that it's you're eating everything that you buy, or if you're not able to eat it, then compost it or use it. Maybe you have chickens. I have backyard chickens. I feed my chickens food scraps and food waste. So trying to minimize food waste, I think, on an individual level is one of the most important things that people could do.
Yeah. What do you feel about plant perception? I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like the idea that plants have feelings and all that type of
Yeah.
stuff. Because I look at like, for instance, my grandmom has asthma. So when we went to Hawaii, it was clear air. It was like better for her to breathe. She didn't need her inhaler. And I'm like, with all the pollution and all the stuff that we're really not noticing, like I live in a beach town. If I
Right.
go into the city, I can smell like, oh, the air has changed. The quality of air has changed. But when I'm
Right.
near the water, oh my God, it's so fresh and it's just amazing salt air in your lungs. I look at the plants, I'm like, they gotta feel that too. That can't just be me. Like that can't it's gotta be harder
Yeah.
for a plant to grow with so much air pollution as well. There's no clean air for them to survive off of.
I mean, you're not wrong. There are definitely effects of pollution on plant growth. I mean, we saw that a little bit with smoke. We have a lot of wildfires in California, and so we have seen effects of smoke on plant growth. If the smoke can block out the sun and make it harder for the plants to actually absorb sunlight and therefore to grow. So that is definitely one aspect of it. But plants can also act as filters, right? So they actually are taking in some of those things and can filter them out so that we get fresher air. There's houseplant things that you can buy to filter your air.
Yeah.
So I mean, plants are essentially like when I think about a plant, I think about it as sort of like a way for us to have filtered air, but also for us to eat. I mean, they do so much for all of us. I don't think people think about it enough.
Yeah.
They carbon capture, they capture all that carbon that makes sugars that we then eat, that other things eat, that we eat those things. So I mean, essentially, like plants are really the basis of our ability to live on this planet.
Yeah. What did the wildfires in California affect you at all? Because I know that was big around like what was it last year when it happened?
Yeah, I mean, they've affected all of us. Yeah. I mean, in the area that I live in, I mean, I live right next to where the campfire happened. So yes, that was a really big impact. That was what 2018, 2019. So that was a huge effect. And then last year, I wasn't that near to any fires, but definitely the air quality was pretty awful.
Did you
So
see
that
like
on top
did
of
you see a shift
coronavirus.
in like the change in the growth of the rice, for instance? Because I'm telling you, I'm not saying
Yeah.
plants have emotions and they write down in a diary, but I'm saying that's gotta affect that. Like there has to be some type of recognizable change of like when the air quality changed that maybe the plant life. Because I mean, back in the
Yeah.
day, like in the dinosaur periods or the colossal, whatever you want to say, age, carbon was a lot more. So plants were a lot bigger. And that's like the whole thing with like carbon pollution. Everyone's talking about like the earth becoming a little bit greener or whatever it was is becoming
Right.
warmer out. It's all from carbon emissions as well. It's not necessarily bad for plant life, but it's pretty bad for human life.
Right. Well, so but there are different types of plants that have different like I guess you could call it like air capture systems, different photosynthetic systems. So it doesn't affect all plants the same. And I'm not, I don't, this is not my area of specialty, but I, read a lot about it. And definitely there are some plants that would do better in a high CO2 environment and some that it wouldn't really make a difference. Just based on how fast they can actually metabolize and process that carbon dioxide. For rice, most of the effect that we saw was from the smoke, like literally blocking out the sun. So I mean, and again, this isn't measured. This is more like anecdotal, but we saw, some places had a lot higher, or a lot more smoke cover for a lot longer period of time, and they had a little bit less production in those areas. But that was literally because the sun was being blocked out for weeks.
That's so mind-boggling to me, the
Yeah,
fact that the sun was blocked by smoke where you couldn't even see through it. It was like when I saw a video of
yeah,
when the wildfires were happening, I saw a fire tornado. I'm like, "Oh my god, like, this is like nobody like, some people will never know what that's like." Some
yeah,
people will never even have no some people didn't even know that even happened. Like, that's gonna be news to some people listening, and I'm like, it's crazy to see, like, how, like, because I respect the earth, like, heavily, just because it has so much immense power, I think, in it. And it's just like this giant thing that's giving us all life where we're kind of visitors here. And not to sound
mhm,
like a hippy dippy or whatever, but it's this aspect of like we're barely understanding it. We're finding out new stuff all the time about it. And it's just it's just fascinating to me.
yeah. No, it is, and yeah, it did actually like. I mean, I live in right, like I said, near where the campfire happened, and that was a few years ago now. But yeah, it literally like looked like night for a few days. And I wasn't like right near the fire, but the smoke from the fire blocked the sun for days, and there was ash raining from the sky. It's pretty crazy, even when you're not right next to the fire. And I thankfully have not lived in an area where I was that close to a fire, but just being in the smoke area is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I had someone talk about it before, and they were talking about how like when they would walk outside, they would step in like these piles of ash. Like the whole ground was
Yeah,
covered in ash. But it was like when you were if you see the video of somebody walking on the moon and there's that footprint that the astronauts leave there, that was like walking through just there's these piles of ash. And I'm like, man, people don't realize like that affected like everyone was like, oh well, I'm glad I'm not in California. I'm like, bro, like that's more than just California, man. That's people that's getting hurt down there, man. Like people lost their homes
yeah,
in mudslides, people lost their homes in fires. It's
yeah,
outrageous. People don't understand the impacts. Like we've had recently off the coast of Taiwan, like severe tsunamis and earthquakes and things happening. I'm like, that could happen anywhere. Like just because you have an invisible line that divides you from a different state doesn't mean it's not going to
yeah.
happen where you live.
Yeah, no, and it's true. And like, I think one of the things that people don't realize is like for California at least, and the effect of you know California and wildfires and other things that happen here, it affects the rest of the U.S. We produce a lot of the food that people eat in the rest of the U.S. I don't think people realize the amount of food that we produce in California. We're like, we produce most of the fruits and vegetables, all of the nuts, um, a lot of the dairy, um, rice, not so much, but I mean, we are a big producer of rice. But I mean, in terms of especially fresh fruits and vegetables, we're really it. There's minimal production in the rest of the United States. So, the Midwest and stuff, there's a lot of wheat and grain crops, but in terms of fruits and veggies and stuff, we produce, we're, very, very high up there. And so when there are effects here, it affects everybody else. And I don't think people are quite cognizant of exactly how important California is to not only like US agriculture, but also the world.
Well, the only reason people are looking at California now is the aspect of everybody's moving out of there, which I had a question about for you. Like, do you like that
Sure.
it's less people are living there? Like, does it feel like I can finally breathe without everybody stomping on top of me?
Well, to be honest, like I think they did some studies recently that it actually wasn't what people were saying. There were a lot of people moving out, but people were moving out of the Bay Area but staying in California. So there have been some people, but it's not to the extent that I think people originally thought it was.
Is it more like being living there? Is it difficult dealing with everything that's going on, like at least with the governor or whoever is running California down there?
The governor, I mean, I'm not that involved in politics side of things here. I mean, I think like, there's been, closures due to the coronavirus and obviously the wildfires and things, but politically I'm not super engaged.
Yeah, because I look at like if I was gonna run a state or something, I would be checking
Yeah.
out all the producers that are making the things for me. Like, hey, what's going on? Is everybody okay down here? But it's very, very hard unless you're running for like a political office or point. Nobody talks to these people. Nobody gets down and like that is at least in a office state or headed for something that is going to make like legislature or something like that. Nobody ever talks to people. Like, you're fucking passing a bill of agriculture. You want to talk to someone who's involved in that rather than be like, well, it seems like a good idea. I bet it does. But did you ask the expert, the guy who's waking up every single morning and going out there and farming that stuff? Like, you mentioned golden rice to me. I have no clue what that is. I know that if I go to Walmart, like I did today, I bought, there was brown rice, Spanish rice, and then there was rice with beans. So what is golden rice?
So golden rice is not available for sale in the United States, but it is a project from, I think it's IRI, so the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines. And they've been working on it for a long time, but it was basically a way to get vitamin A levels up in rice, because a lot of the world, I think I mentioned this the last time I was here, a lot of the world gets a large amount of its calories from rice. Rice is one of the most important like calorie foods for the world. And so they were working on getting vitamin A into rice so that people wouldn't have night blindness. Because if you don't get enough vitamin A as a child, you end up blind at night. And vitamin A is just a very important nutrient, period.
Is that in
The way
carrots?
that they, huh?
Is that in carrots?
It is in carrots. Yeah.
Okay.
So actually, yeah, they were able to. I'm probably going to be wrong here on some level, but basically they were able to get the rice to produce beta carotene, which is converted into vitamin A in our
Holy
body.
crap. That's as soon as you said night blindness, I think of the commercial where they have the sunglasses you can drive with at night to help you see. And I'm like, oh my God, I remember I almost bought those one time because I don't know if it's just because of I'm only 23. I'm not like old or anything, but
Yeah.
I'm driving at night and I'm like, it's freaking hard to see. I don't know if it's my headlights or if it's just I'm going blind or something like that. But like you realize I think there was a giant push and pull here when coronavirus hit, which was vitamin D was essential. Everyone was buying supplements for it. I was like,
Yeah. Just walk
there's
outside.
yeah, I
Yeah.
was like,
But yeah.
there's gotta be a way, like, not just vitamin D, but there's other vitamins that are essential that we need that we're just not getting on a daily basis. I know they started finding out a correlation. His name's Dr. Mark Gordon. He was studying PTSD and depression in like war veterans, and he started to find out that a lot of it was linked to their inflammatory system. That depression is actually coming from an inflammatory response. You know, when you eat 10 donuts, for instance, it sounds good, but then after you eat it, you feel like shit. And usually when you feel bad about yourself, you get depressed. You know, these certain things act up in your body, and you take that depression out, or you take that anger or that feeling of low self-worth out on someone beside you, which creates more hostilities and, you know, in the society or whatever the community that you're living in. And I'm like, it all boils down to nutrition. It's very, very simple. I was like, there's got to be way, like with golden rice, for instance, getting more vitamin A for a specific reason to help out with like, you know, vision ideas or something of that sort. There's got to be ways to give other vitamins in rice. Would you consider that ethical, or are you more
I mean,
about keeping the
they already
original?
fortify lots of food. So I mean, but that's not through like plant breeding techniques, but lots of food is fortified. I mean, there's milk has vitamin D in it. A lot of cereals and things like breakfast cereals are fortified with lots of different vitamins. So I think that's not a new concept. They've been, people have been thinking about that for a long time.
Thinking, let's do some doing.
No, but I mean they do fortify foods already. Like, but that's like after the fact. So they put vitamins and other things into the food after it's been processed. But I think the vitamin A, producing rice is one of the first um, ones where we actually, genetically modified the plant to produce something that it normally didn't produce. But it did change the color of the rice, which is why it's called golden rice. It is golden, not white. So it was there was a lot of controversy surrounding it. Um, but I think it's not a bad thing to have vitamins available to people in foods that they normally eat. Um, and changing someone's diet is a lot harder than just adding vitamins to something that they already eat.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of controversy. There still is about golden rice, and it's not approved, as I said, in every country to be sold. Um, Not approved in the U.S., not approved in Europe that I know of. Um, but it's approved in a lot of countries in Asia, and I think there was some resistance to it at first, like from consumers, just because it looked different. But I know people, I mean, people have been eating it.
I'm not
So
against the idea of it. Like I like to keep things, I think, it should stay original as much as possible. But if it comes to like getting essential vitamins and things where like maybe your town or your city is kind of suffering from a deficiency in it, I consider it a benefit. But I don't consider it, I wouldn't want to change the original so much to where the original still couldn't be the same thing. I'd want to make
yeah,
it to where like if I could modify the crop, I would just make a whole new species rather than trying to change all of this one to this new one. I'm like, no, I would want to keep the original there too for people that wouldn't want to, because GMO, it gets so complicated with that. It gets so when people start saying genetically modified or something of that sort, people go like, oh my God, it's going to give me a third eye. I'm like, no, it's not going to do. I mean, most yoga people are searching for a third eye, but you're not going to get that from the chemicals in it. No, but it helps with, I mean, insects, for instance. That probably has to be the
mhm,
biggest thing right now, not only with, yeah, there's pollution and stuff there, but I couldn't remember seeing fireflies for a very long time. I think we talked about when we last did our podcast. And then with all this shutdown and lockdowns, I started seeing fireflies again. I was like, where did you guys go? Like, you start to realize everybody kind of taking a step back from the environment, not being out so much. It kind of gave the earth a chance to breathe a little bit. And the next
yeah,
thing you start seeing things come back. And one of the main issues that we're trying to eliminate is the amount of insects that consume the crops that we're trying to grow. I mean, a large
true.
percentage
Yeah,
still of the crop yield that we have. Yeah, we do get a lot of crops, but at the same time, some are most, or not most, but a good amount is lost due to certain aspects of the environmental issues, whether a crop dies, not getting enough water, or whether insects are eating the leaves and deciding to, kill the crop before we have a chance to harvest it.
true, true. Yeah, and I think like people don't necessarily understand in that aspect, GMOs have been very important. Yeah, viruses, right? Plants have viruses that attack them, and there's no way to stop those viruses. Like we don't have chemicals that can stop a virus. Like we get a vaccine for a virus. We don't have vaccines for plants,
Yeah.
and there's no way to treat a virus. There's no antiretroviral for a plant. So the way that people have been able to, deal with viral problems, uh, papayas in Hawaii is probably one of the best examples of it. But that was through GMO techniques, and that's you know so I think GMOs have a place. I think that they're important. Um, Bananas are another one. There's a banana mosaic virus that's been attacking bananas. So that's another example of one that they've used.
What's attacking bananas? What do you mean? That's a food I eat,
There,
so I'm very protective of the foods I eat.
there's a virus that's also been attacking bananas. Bananas are clones, so each banana is genetically identical to the last banana. So there's no genetic diversity. So if something gets one banana, it gets all the bananas. So they've been working on getting or creating a banana that is resistant to those viruses.
Curious George is gonna be pissed. Um, but no, that's insane though, because like for instance, like we have a lot of food I think that we all kind of understand. It says organic on it, but it's probably genetically modified too. I mean, I have a 5 pound
Well, I
apple.
mean, so they can't genetically modify like in the way that we're thinking about. So people get freaked out about GMOs, right?
Yeah.
But it's everything is essentially genetically modified. All the plants that we eat, none of them look like they did when they were found in the wild. Like humans have been selecting for and modifying plants over time just by growing them, right? So like a banana in the wild looks
It's
nothing
like
like a banana.
domesticating a plant, basically.
It is domesticating a plant. Yeah. So like corn, for example, teosinte, like the predecessor to corn, is this tiny little shrimpy little looking thing, right? The actual corn cob. And now our corn cobs are ginormous, right? So I mean, if you think about what they all looked like in the wild before, we domesticated them, they look nothing like they do now.
Yeah, I'm not a
So
like I said, I mean, I studied a little bit about GMOs only because I heard so many people talk about how they're bad for you. But I'm like, I was studying what the ideal behind it was the idea. Like, I remember reading an article about Haitian mud cookies, and I was like, what the hell is a Haitian mud cookie? And it was people in Africa that were literally taking mud and making cookies out of that. And the dirt that they made, it's like 90% dirt and like 10% salt. They would take these cookies and they'd eat them. So they're eating dirt, And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awful. And it was just a
Yeah.
way to pack your stomach with something to where you wouldn't feel the need for starvation. You wouldn't feel that urge of like, oh my God, I'm dying because I'm not eating anything. It just packed your stomach full of mud.
Right.
And I was like, this is why we have GMOs, to be able to grow crops in an area where there's not a lot of water. I mean, I was talking to
True. Yeah.
a astroecologist who's trying to figure out what best plants to grow in space, other types of things we could take up there to start like a colony. Literally, that's fucking crazy to me. But it's an aspect of like cactuses, for instance. They're the best examples because they grow in desert climates, which is
Right.
perfect for a
True.
place like the moon that doesn't have any, well, it has water now that we know, but Mars or all these dust planets and stuff like this. It's trying to find what types of traits would be best suited and work together well in some other foods to figure out, hey, we can grow this in a place where these people are starving. I think a lot of people get so close-minded because how easily accessible food is here, and it's
Yeah.
not in other countries.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. And yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, it's very hard to access food in a lot of places on the planet, and I agree with that. And the banana example actually is one that they was a country in East Africa. I forget which one it was now, but the scientists there are the ones that were able to genetically modify the banana. And so, I mean, I'm not opposed to GMOs. I think it. There are other issues involved. Maybe like I'm a weed scientist, so I work with.
It needs to be perfected is what the thing is. It's like it's
Well,
still
and
kind
I
of in
think
the trial
I mean
stages.
I guess, well, I mean, we've been growing GMO crops for a long time, but like, um, there are, pluses and minuses to every system, right? And every new thing that we come up with, there's some good things and there's some bad things. And so I think people sort of sometimes think of everything as being like either bad or
Yeah.
good, right? And it's like, no, it's not always just bad or good. Like there are shades of gray in between. And like it might be good in one situation, like the papaya example that basically saved the entire papaya industry in Hawaii. Otherwise, it would have been wiped out, right? So there's an example of like it benefited the farmers there, people there that were growing papayas. So like, and it benefits the rest of us, and that we get to eat papayas from Hawaii, right? So, or the banana example, like, are we going to wipe out a whole food for lots of people eat bananas all over the world. Lots of people in African countries grow bananas because they grow well there, and in South America as well. So like that would wipe out an entire people's ability to support themselves if bananas went away.
Yeah.
So I think like there's like shades of gray and everything, and like there's no like one answer. Like GMOs are good or GMOs are bad. They're
Every
useful in
cause
some.
has an effect. I think a lot of people need to take into account. I think everybody looks at like, well, it's going to do this. So I'm like, yeah, but it's also, if you can grow something in your state or in your country perfectly fine without really the need of GMOs, then 100% for it. But don't stop the research to try and get that affected into a plant if it's going to be grown. Like if you're trying to grow
Yeah,
pineapples in a place where pineapples don't grow. I mean, they grow pineapples in Hawaii. They take 48 months. But
right.
if you're trying to grow that in Africa where someone wants to try a pineapple, I see the benefit of finding GMOs with that. That's kind of like accepting, like when we have beef here, we're in a fish town. Beef is expensive. So when you're getting beef, either it's been brought over here, that's why it's so expensive. And if you find cheap ones, you're like, okay, that's been genetically modified. It's been processed somehow. There's something inside of that. That's why it's so cheap. So I
Well,
look,
I think like so beef isn't genetically, yeah, but beef isn't genetically modified. We have very few animals that are genetically modified. So, I mean,
maybe process would be a better word.
yeah, I think you're thinking of process. Yeah.
Yeah. So like even though that's processed, that's why it's so low, but you're accepting that. You understand that because that's why you're getting that for that price. You're understanding like that's not from here. It's
Right.
processed meat. So you're understanding that. And I'm like, that's
Yeah.
just the price everybody has to understand. You can't pick and choose where you're born. You can pick and choose where
Right.
you live when you get to above age, but some people don't have the option to travel to a whole new country. So them being able to get a food, even if it's genetically modified, they're kind of accepting the idea of like, okay, this doesn't naturally come here. It's like in Australia. They have a rabbit ban. They don't like rabbits over there because rabbits aren't supposed to be there. They have way too many of them there. Some dude brought them over in 1825. I'm like, same thing with fucking plants. You're bringing a plant to a whole new area. Don't be surprised if they modified it to grow here.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, and I mean, things don't grow everywhere. Even with all the breeding techniques that we have now, we still can't. So there's a lot of shipping involved, and like you're saying, it's hard for you guys to get beef. So I don't know where they're shipping beef from, but it's probably somewhere else in the United States.
Being able to grow a plant in an area where it's not naturally found is a benefit. Now, what I hate about it is if some person starts making rice taste like grapes, I'm like, look, no, you're playing something. You're playing devil, not God. You're playing devil. That's not supposed to. Like when I walk into the store and I see the grapes that taste like cotton candy, I'm like, all right, I get it. I get it. It's cool. It's a fun. I was surprised, but at the same time, I'm like, that's not healthy. There's something in there that's not. It's good. You're gonna walk down the
But
street next
those
thing
are
you're
all through like traditional breeding techniques. That's not GMO. So
to
that's
make a
somebody.
grape taste like cotton
No,
candy.
it's not GMO. It's just some sort of traditional crossing. Yeah, there are scientists. Like I mean, literally, we like with rice when we do traditional breeding. Somebody. I'm not good at this, but somebody literally takes like tiny little bit of pollen from one rice grain and puts it in another one.
God bless that person. God bless them,
I
because
agree.
you got to have the patience of a saint. That's like, here, I want
You
you
do.
to organize all these pieces of rice individually. I would lose my freaking mind. I used to get upset when someone used to turn my pencils on my desk a wrong way. I was like, they need to go straight up and down. Like that would kill me, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not a breeder. I'm not a plant breeder, but like I work with plant breeders and rice breeders, and yeah, it's really intense work.
Well, even
Yep.
though that's intense work, you're doing an important part yourself because you're studying this type of stuff and you're looking and you're talking to these people as well. I mean, that's one of the most important things because you're not necessarily them, but you're giving them also a voice and you're also highlighting what they're doing. A lot of people wouldn't know what people go through to be able to create this food. That's my whole proponent of like, you need to go find out where your food comes from because when you like I know a bunch of people that do farm to table type style food restaurants where they
For
go to the
sure.
market
Yep.
and they pick out their own food. They make a camaraderie or a communication with the person that's growing it so they understand who that person is, what they're going through every single day because it's going to help you when it comes to your consumption values, which
For
it,
sure.
it goes
Yeah.
back to the main point of like there is a giant consumption issue in our country. We're using way too much. And I'm like talking to people. That's why I like looking at documentaries when it comes to anything that happens to do with agriculture. I'm like,
Yeah.
fascinated by it.
Well, I'll just give a shout out to my grower friend again. But like Rice Farming TV, if anyone wants to know more about like rice production in California, he does excellent YouTube videos. I'm like, he's got the whole production thing going, but he does them like on a weekly basis, and you can really see like how rice goes from, the beginning of the season all the way to the end of the season. And it's actually their videos are very well done as well. He's very good videographer.
If you had hopes for what you want to accomplish in the next year, what are one of your accomplishments you want to get done?
Well, so I work with growers, but I also work with the community. So one of the things that I've been kind of wanting to do and working on is putting a community garden or a place that people can get community garden plots in the area that I work in. So that's probably one of my bigger like community goals. Um, from like a research standpoint, I'll just keep trucking in what I've been doing. So if you guys ever want to come to California, you can catch me in a rice field. But yeah, just kind of going forward with the research projects I've been working on, mostly again focusing on weeds.
Do you think that the community aspect, like starting a community garden, what would you say the importance you see in that is? Because I see it as like a bringing the community together a little bit too. I mean, there's a sense of hardship or workmanship when you can actually grow something, and a sense of like a beneficial factor of like that feeling you get when you do grow something that a lot of people don't really know or feel like they want to experience because I feel like they don't
Yeah.
understand what that is.
Well, I think from like the standpoint of like seeing how things went over the past year, I think a lot of people, like you were mentioning earlier, did try to grow something for the first time, but not everyone has access to like a space where they can grow. I teach students and I show them how to do things in pots and milk cartons and other things. That, I mean, you can still grow on like a small scale, even in your own home or on your porch or whatever. But I think having a community garden for us would give us an opportunity to also have classes there, so people could come and learn about different aspects of gardening. So that's kind of why I would like to do it, is so that we get the garden aspect, but we can also hold classes for the community when we're allowed to again. and maybe even do nutrition classes. Part of my office, other folks work on the nutrition aspect, so we like to collaborate a lot in that way. So nutrition / gardening classes in like a centralized space where people can also have garden plots.
I like it. And I'm going to ask you one question before I let you go. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
If you couldn't do rice and you had to study something else, what would it be? And if you say
Like,
bananas, I'm going to lose my mind.
well, I honestly like I would probably study any crop or work in any crop if I could. I like agriculture. I picked this profession because I don't like sitting behind a computer all day. I know it's happened to me this year because circumstances beyond my control, but I really like being outside. So anything that involved being outside, I'd be down.
Okay. All right. But if you had to choose one crop, though, come on.
Oh no. If I had to choose one other crop, probably would be something tree related, to be honest with you, because it's very nice to work outside under shade.
Like a walnut? Would you do a walnut?
Sure, walnuts or almonds, something that has shade. Yeah.
Are almonds on trees?
Yeah. Yeah. Almonds are on trees.
Learn something new
Actually where
every
I
day.
live here is the main almond growing region of the United States. Yeah.
I didn't know that. And honestly, I'm still thinking about almond milk. Like, how do you get milk out of an almond? You just soak it in the milk, right? That's what it is.
That I do not know that process, but
And an almond doesn't have an udder. It can't. You have to soak it in milk. I know that's what it is. It's got to be a couple days soaked in milk or something. I feel
yeah,
like
I think there's some squishing involved. I'm not sure.
I would love to be like a string bean farmer or something. I don't know why. I something I like to snap peas. Like, what is
There you
that?
go.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, peaches or something with fruit on the tree. I wouldn't mind that either, because then you can grab, you know.
Oh, like a Granny Smith apple tree. I don't even think those aren't natural. Those are GMO, aren't they?
No, those are natural. Those are natural.
Where?
Granny Smith, Washington State, Oregon. Yeah, we don't grow apples really much in California because it's too warm here. But yeah, up in the north of me, Oregon,
Man,
Washington.
something that good can't be natural. That's crazy. I bite into it. I'm like, it's a sour apple, and they call it. Some people call it the garbage apple. I'm like, that's my favorite
Really?
apple.
Oh, I like Granny Smith. I don't know. I like sour things though.
That's what I'm saying, right? Well, Whitney, it's been awesome talking to you again. Where can people find your Instagram page and be able to look up some of your work as well?
Oh, sure. So, like me personally, I have an Instagram that's at Scientist Kelly, but my Rice group we have social media as well, and ours is all at UC Rice. We've got Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
And I'll make sure I link it all in the description. And thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.